Welcome to Refirement Life, the podcast for anyone navigating life transitions or planning to make life transitions to ensure your next years are your best years. Listen in for insightful, generous, and sometimes humorous conversation. It's time to get fired up with Christine Zamuda and Muge Wood, your hosts for this latest episode of Refirement Life.
Hello, everyone. This is episode 63. We are with Dr. Margie Warrell. I'm very excited to host Margie today. Margie is a best-selling author, leadership advisor, keynote speaker, and courage catalyst. Dr. Margie Warrell brings deep insight into human and organizational behavior to foster braver leadership and better outcomes, something the world definitely needs right now. And we're very, very excited to learn more about Margie's book, and it's her latest book, The Courage Gap. This is an opportunity for Margie to share decades of research and experience, providing a roadmap for closing the gap between potential and performance. Welcome, Dr. Margie Warrell.
It's great to be with you.
Excellent. And of course, we have Muge, our wonderful rock star co-host. Hey, Muge.
Hi there. Welcome, Margie. I am very much looking forward to this because I read the outline that Christine put together, and all that's stuck in my head, and I mentioned this to my husband, is the courage gap. And how do you close the courage gap? So that is what's stuck in my head, and I'm looking forward to learning, discussing, and just taking a step forward for a better version of self.
Yeah, well, we're all working on that, okay. So let's dive in, huh?
Love it. Would love it. So you've written many books, and in this latest release, what inspired you to write about this now?
Well, the last 5 years in particular, obviously we are at the 5-year mark as we speak since the world was turned upside down with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I had a pretty tumultuous year myself. I was living in Singapore. Singapore closed its borders. Australia, where I'm from, I'm a citizen of, closed its borders. I had 3 children living in the US, could not return home. And my husband got COVID, was locked up for 30 days in Singapore. I was locked up. So 2020 was a year where I realized courage isn't only about being brave and putting yourself out there and taking risks and pursuing what it is you most want and making changes. Sometimes courage is just simply about regulating our own fear and anxiety response. So that was sort of a new dimension to courage I hadn't experienced as much before, like just that deep need to manage our own fear and nervous system. But then I moved to the United States in late 2020, and so I've been here now just over 4 years. I took a role as senior partner in board and CEO succession at Korn Ferry, which is one of the world's sort of most preeminent sort of people consulting organizations. And I got to work with some of the most senior leaders in some of the biggest companies in the world. And I just left that role only about 2 months ago. And it was really a deep privilege to do that work. But what I found both incredibly illuminating and affirming is the need for courage at the highest leadership tables, and how a deficit of courage, how a gap between what it is we know we should do and what we do, between our potential and our action, between insight and impact, that gap ultimately creates more vulnerability and greater insecurity over time. And that applies to us as individuals when we're not stepping into our courage gap, when we're not doing the things we know deep down we need to do, but we're afraid to do. But it also applies at an organizational level and at a societal level when we're not living in alignment with our deepest values and principles as well. So all of these factors led me to want to write this book. And I also wanted to write a book that was deeply practical. While it's really based on a lot of research, I didn't want to write a book that was kind of having to wade through treacle to get to read it. I really wanted to make a book that was an easy read, LA to New York flight, that people could digest and immediately apply in their own lives.
That's a great formula. I love that. Because so many times you're reading things that are really theoretical and you're like, okay, interesting, but so what? So as you talked and had the privilege of speaking to so many leaders, what is the reason, the predominant reason for the courage gap? Is it or not having or not showing your courage? What kind of things did you uncover in those conversations?
Well, at the end of the day, if we boil all of this down to the very base level, we humans are wired more for self-preservation than self-actualization. Mm-hmm. More for fitting in than standing out, more for wanting to look good than even our desire to do good. Like our default will always be self-protective. Mm-hmm. And so it takes in real intention for us to be brave with our lives, to step into that gap, because there'll always be a strong force of fear at play, urging us to stick with what's safe, with what gives us a sense of control, certainty, familiarity. That's a strong urge. There's this, like I kind of liken it to an internal tug of war that, I think is part of the human condition. It's like, I know I should reach out and have a conversation with that person that we've had a tension with, but it's going to be so awkward. I don't think I will. I know I should make a change in this situation I'm in at work or in a relationship, but it's also hard, and I don't want to end a relationship. What if I don't meet anyone better? I don't want to make this change. What if it doesn't work out? So our fear of what we don't want often pulls invisible strings that keep us from taking the actions toward what it is that we do want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine too, and I've seen this with myself, I've seen this with other leaders in business, that as you come along in your career, you become, more senior, you take more risk. You don't, that voice becomes stronger to say the things that you really need to say, want to say, or pulling you to say. And that could be also, it can also have impacts, positive and negative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and actually there's a lot of research that shows as people move up the career ladder, as they have more power, as they earn more money, as there's more at stake, the risk reward analysis, like we're always kind of doing this implicit risk reward. Do I, don't I? Do I, don't I? I mean, that's going on for us all the time. Do I say this or not? Do I do this or not? And the downside, the potential risk of losing something we currently value, there's more to lose. It's further to fall. We've got more stock options to be thinking about than when we're 25 or 30. And so that factors in. And then that's where I think we have to be so deeply committed to the values that we want to define our lives by. In order for us to stay true to what, I call it our deeper self, to our true self, and what feels really in alignment and has integrity for ourselves. Of course, it's not always black and white. It's not this is right and this is wrong. Often there's a lot of nuance and a lot of gray, and, there's a lot of different second and third order effects we have to think about in terms of pros and cons of taking action, of saying what we think to be true, maybe of challenging the status quo, speaking out against the current zeitgeist of what's prevailing on the airwaves and the social media streams. And so, that isn't always a clear black and white. Sometimes it is, but not always. And so, Christine, I think it takes a lot of self-reflection. And it's why I have a whole kind of exercise in the start of the book about just getting really clear about, one, who it is you want to be, and what are the values that define who you want to be? And two, what is your highest intention for your situation right now? But, it could be for your life overall, for the next 30 years of your life. What is your highest intention of how you want to use your time, of how you want to impact others, on the kind of relationships you want to forge, the experience you want to have, the experience you want others to have of you? And that can help us sometimes when we're clear on the who, then it helps us give us clarity on what it is we need to do. and it can compel us sometimes to take that braver path, even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It is amazing because I think you said a lot of good things here, Margie, about fear of failure, self-preservation, how much premium we put on that, that it comes in opposition with our values. And then when we lose that congruency, we have less fulfilled lives. I think, yeah, I am curious on your perspective here. So let's say we have a big goal, right? We have a big, lofty goal. We want to change the world. We want to help people. We want to be famous. We want to get into politics, whatever the goal is. And it can be even noble, inspiring, but also big and daunting. So what would you say about the value of taking small steps towards the big goal? So at least you are moving towards it. So it's not so daunting. What is your opinion on that? Do you think that is valuable, is a way to overcome the fear and start moving?
Yeah, well, the number one antidote to fear is action. It's just forward movement. And it matters far less how fast you're going than that you are actually in action, in movement toward something that brings you a sense of meaning. I mean, we humans flourish the most when we're moving towards something that's meaningful. And sometimes there's seasons of life where we can't move very fast. I remember I started writing my very first book when I had 4 children, 7 and under. That was not me going off into the woods for 3 months to write a book. You know, I wrote it in nap times, you know, but my life was more meaningful, and I was building my courage by simply being in action and doing something, even though it was really small. And so, you know, if you think about courage, it is a trait. Yes, some people naturally have a stronger risk tolerance than others, but it's actually a skill. It's a competency. We can cultivate that competency by taking action even though we feel afraid, by moving forward even though we're not sure we're gonna succeed. And it's like, if you think of going to the gym, if you haven't been for a while, you would go there and lift a few weights, you'll be sore tomorrow. But if you go every day over time, you build up that muscle and it becomes easier and less uncomfortable. And it's exactly the same when it comes to moving toward a goal. It's easy to go, oh my gosh, you know, that mountaintop, it's just so big, it's so far. So don't think about that. Like, just break it down into little bite-sized pieces. What is one thing I can do today? And I often say to people, just do one thing, just one thing. It might be just reaching out to one person. It might be signing up to do a course to learn something so you have a better understanding of something you need to learn that's going to be important for that journey. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but just it's something. And every time we take action amid our fears and misgivings, and sometimes amid the risks, we actually empower ourselves because we're reclaiming the power that we've previously given to our doubts and our fears.
Yeah. The other thing that you said, I think that's really important to just dive a little deeper into is you said, recognize what your highest intention is. And if we're thinking about that and thinking about the aspiration and the goals that we want to get, even if they're long term, you may make different decisions in the short term to get there. And always having that presence of mind. How do you help people think about that scenario and really understanding what's my highest intention, at this point in their lives?
Yeah. Well, I think, some wise person once said there's no solution, there's only trade-offs. And we're always making trade-offs, like how we spend our time, and sometimes it's like, we want everything, but there's always going to be, we have to give up one thing to get more of something else. And as we're going through life, there's different priorities. We have different responsibilities, different things we have to manage. So we can't always be putting all of our time or all of our money or all of our energy or creativity into something. And we might go, you know what, I can only do this much. And this is a short-term play, but toward a longer term aspiration. And I think we have to give ourselves permission for that. There's a lot of factors always to be weighing in. But it's important to keep in mind that we all have what's called a temporal bias toward the short term and to discounting the future. It's relatively easy for us to imagine how we'll feel this afternoon or tomorrow if we try something and it doesn't work out, to imagine ourselves feeling uncomfortable or uneasy or anxious, etc. What we're not so good at doing is putting ourselves in the shoes of us 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now. It just, that distant day, just it's harder to connect to emotionally. So we value the emotions we'll feel in 2 hours' time versus in 2 years' time a whole lot more. And we have to be always just consulting, I think, our future self and going, 2 years from now, what would my future self be wanting me to be doing more of today or less of today? And I think there's such a power sometimes in just having a little moment of reflection and trying to connect with that future version of ourselves, because often there is a wisdom in that, in looking at things through a much longer arc of time. But as we go through our busy days, we're always focused on the here and now and what's coming at me right now versus, that future point. And it's why, people don't always save as much for their future as maybe that would make sense for them. Actually, I heard a study once that it was these life insurance people with retirement, actually it was retirement savings, 401k. And they asked people who were 25 how much they wanted to save. And one people just got, a table. If you put away this much, this is how much you'll have when you're 60. If you put away this much. And the others got a digitally aged image of themselves at age 60. And those who got the digitally aged image of themselves chose to put away more money because it helped them imagine themselves at 60.
That is very cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. I think we all need that. The power of visualization. I love that.
Yeah. There's a real power in that. But anyway, so I hope that sort of helps people just to think about through that longer arc of time and recognizing that often our fear, it doesn't show up always as, oh, I'm so anxious. Sometimes it shows up as busyness. Sometimes it shows up as procrastination, which is really just us delaying the risk of failing, of feeling the emotions. Sometimes it shows up in people posturing. Sometimes it shows up in intellectualizing our emotions and, just conceptualizing everything versus feeling what we need to feel. So just recognizing that, our fear shows up in many different ways. And the smarter you think you are, the more cunning it is in operating in the background.
Yeah.
What do you think? That is interesting, the point about how it's not just about being scared in the traditional sense, but all these other ways. I think another one, I experienced this myself as well, is putting too much premium on other people's thoughts. And that holding you back. And then in reality, you find that people actually are not thinking so much about you because they have to think about themselves. So we can put a lot of premium, though, on that. And I also see that that is one of the best parts about aging. We seem to care a bit less what others think as we age, and that may be a very good liberating feeling, opening up doors for new chapters in our lives. So what are your thoughts, Margie, on managing the self-talk we run in our heads because of what others think about our actions?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I wrote about that in the Courage Gap. In fact, I wrote about 4 different fear traps, like 4 different kind of cognitive biases that can undermine our decisions and actions and our experiences. And one of those is betraying ourselves to secure status with others. And we all want to belong. I mean, it's deeply ingrained into the human condition. We want to belong. And dating back thousands of years ago, we couldn't exist if we weren't part of a tribe. Like we needed the tribe for safety and security. These days, we can physically exist in a more isolated way, but that doesn't mean we're thriving. And we know today that more people than ever are struggling with loneliness and isolation because of the world that we live in. But recognizing that we are wired to want to fit in, to want to be part of a group and belong. And I think that's a key tendency of the human condition that's driven people into these polarized echo chambers of self-protection, because everyone around us is making us feel better ourselves, and we have the common enemy, intimacy. So I think that social media, etc., really feeds on that deep fear that we have. But I've long believed we have to be so careful that we're not letting the opinions of other people hold more weight than our own opinion of ourselves. And that sounds good. That's like a nice cliche. But I tell you what, it's easy to get pulled into impression management and trying to look good and please and prove and impress. And, there's Keegan wrote about this in his book, Immunity to Change, how, a lot of people in their lives spend so much of their energy on trying to look good and avoid looking bad. We want to make sure our stock is rising in the eyes of others, or at least that it's not going down. And so just recognizing most people can get very vulnerable to that. And we have to continually come back and just, why am I doing this? Am I being true to myself, or am I just trying to avoid upsetting Christine, trying to avoid Muge, feeling like I haven't lined up with her and she might not invite me to her party this year? We all can find ourselves in those spots. And so I think we have to be so careful that we are being true to ourselves. And I often say to people, like, how long since you've disappointed someone? And a lot of people have to scratch their heads and go, they go back a while. Well, I think if we're living the lives that we feel really called to be living, that means we need to be saying no to a lot of things that are good and worthy things, even invitations, because they're not necessarily lined up with what we most want to do. And often our decisions are guided more by other people's priorities and what other people want of us and what other people think we should be doing than what we most want for ourselves. And that will sometimes mean disappointing people, not because we want to disappoint them, but because we ultimately don't want to disappoint ourselves.
Yeah, I love that question. I think that's a key takeaway. What is the last time you disappointed someone? And if it is ages ago, not good.
Yeah, and being mindful that, and that's not because we don't want to take care of people. And as women, I think we are particularly, we are deeply wired to care for people. We're often strongly attuned to the emotions of other people. We want to make people feel valued and cared for. And that's ingrained into us. I know it's ingrained into me. I want people to feel that I'm taking care of them and that they're seen and that they feel like I value the relationship. But if I said yes to everything that was being asked of me, then there would be no time for the things that I deeply want to do. And so it's not because we want to disappoint people, but because we so want to honor ourselves. And actually, we don't do anyone any favors. In fact, we do a disservice to people when we're not honoring. I think I call it the siren call of our own hearts. Like, what is it that we need to be doing?
Agree. And you feel that as a person, right? When you're maybe invited to something that you don't want to attend and you feel that friction, that's a good trigger to just say no. Because what's worse is if you go there and you're not really there. Right.
Well, we've all heard of FOMO, but there's also JOMO, and JOMO is a sign.
I love JOMO.
JOMO
is great.
If you've got a lot of JOMO, then the question is, why did you say yes to begin with? That left you so joyful when it got cancelled.
Yes.
And was that actually an indicator that you were lacking courage in that moment?
Yes, the joy of missing out.
The joy of missing out, and you generally. That isn't because you've said no, it's because you've said yes to something and then it cancels often. And you're like, someone says, I can't do this, or we can't. You're like, oh, thank goodness I didn't want to do it anyway.
So great. So one other big theme in your work is reframing risk. Can you talk a little bit more about that? As you mentioned in your book, it's not always being the most confident. There's other strategies to showing up.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we talk about risk, often people think about financial risk. They think about operational risk. I mean, risk there are many risks. Life is innately risky. Every day you walk out your door, there's a risk. You know, life is full of risks. And we're conditioned by many messages as a child, you know, don't do anything risky, you know, play it safe, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And so it's often ingrained into us. In fact, I think we live in a very risk-phobic society. And I believe that social media and the digital world we're in has magnified our perceptions of risk. There are many people today that are afraid of so many things, and they suffer way more from their fear of all the dangers than actually from the dangers, any really legitimate, the probabilities of those things happening to them. So just recognizing that life is innately risky. You know, you can't avoid risk. I mean, even if I say I'm not going out because it's too dangerous out there, well, okay, then there's a risk of me missing out on all the things that I could have got from going out and braving the dangers, right? So just mindful, every side of things has another counter risk. We mightn't see it. And often it's the risks we're not taking that we regret the most. In fact, the theory of regret shows that we are 3 times more likely to regret the chances that we didn't take than the ones we did. At the end of life, it's like, people generally at the end of life, people generally regret that they hadn't been a little bolder, that they hadn't said yes to the opportunity that would have meant moving across the country, that they hadn't, you know, spoken up and shared what was really on their hearts and minds more often and more authentically. So just being mindful, risk comes in many forms, but actually when we're not willing to take risks, we ultimately end up less secure. Mm-hmm. And we build our confidence in taking risks by taking risks. Mm-hmm. And often we underestimate, often our brains are twice as sensitive to what could go wrong and what we could lose than what could go right. And we tend to underestimate our ability to deal with things if they didn't go well, when actually we're much more competent at that. We go, oh, I'll end up on the streets. I could, you know, actually you're going to intervene way before you end up, you know, living on the streets. So just being mindful of how our brain plays tricks on us, and actually the odds are often better than we think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That is such a great point. The odds are better than we think. And a lot of times, I think we try to maintain control over outcomes in our future. However, a lot of times what we think is going to happen doesn't happen, and what we think wouldn't happen happens. So, I mean, I think there's a little bit of letting go of control would also be good, which is also a lot tougher than, you know, it sounds. So as we wind down, Margie, what are some actions or key takeaways you would like our listeners to walk away with, so we close that courage gap at least a bit?
Yeah. Well, I think the most powerful question is just to ask yourself, if you were being the bravest version of yourself today, and if you're not even sure who that is, think of someone really brave you admire and imagine them transporting themselves into your being, looking out at the world through their eyes, and you're going, okay, if they were looking at my life, like, what would they be doing more of, less of? What conversations would they be having? But otherwise, just ask yourself, you know, what would the bravest version of me be doing today? Because within every one of us is the brave person we aspire to be. I mean, the courage we admire in others lives in us. So ask yourself that question. What's something that I could be doing today if I was being really brave? Secondly, be kind to yourself in the moments that you mess up. And instead of kind of internalizing like, oh, I'm such a wimp, or I'm such an idiot, or I'm such a loser, I'm such a failure, go, I'm just a human on a journey here. But now who is it that I choose to be? And put the who before the do. And I think that when we put who before do, who is it I want to be right now? And then what doing flows from that actually compels us to pick ourselves up faster and to move forward a little braver than we might have otherwise.
Yeah. I always love the question, who do you want to be at the end of your life?
Yeah, that's a great one.
Wow. So much wisdom today, Margie. Oh my gosh.
Thanks,
I hope
Christine.
I think that we're just going to unleash a whole new tribe of bolder people. Watch out, world.
Well, you know, and I would just say to anyone who's listening, you might not relate to being a bold person. You might go, that's just not me. I just want to say, when it comes to being braver and having courage, this isn't about personality types. The world needs all personality types. We don't want everyone to be a Bear Grylls, Richard Branson person, but it is about looking at where in your life you're being called to be braver in some way, shape, or form. And maybe it's just opening yourself up and being a little more vulnerable. Maybe it's just reaching out to people when it's a little uncomfortable for you. But we're all called to be brave in different ways, and it changes as we go through the different seasons of life as well.
Right. Back to the small steps so you can get to the life that you've always wanted and should be living based on your true and authentic self.
And I think it's in all of us to be able to do this. And I think when we probably take a stock of our lives, we have been brave at different times for different reasons. And they may not look like a firefighter brave type of thing, but the daily acts that we have taken on. So I think that's inspirational. It's almost this notion of what we do need is already within us type of thing, but try to have that come out so we can live our best lives. So that's really powerful. Some good reflection, visualization ahead of us, I think.
Yeah. No. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you just giving me a chance to share some of what I'm clearly very passionate about.
Yes, lovely conversation. And for our listeners, we'll have a link to Margie's website, as well as her wonderful book, The Courage Gap, which we encourage you all to check out. Thank you so much for being a guest today. We enjoyed our time together. Until next time.
Till next time. Thank you, Margie.
Thanks you all.
Thank you for listening. Our hope is to spark a little joy, inspire, and educate our listeners in ways to live an even more meaningful life. If you have reactions to share from what you've heard, please visit our website, refirement.life, to leave a voice message. You may even be featured in a future episode. To keep in touch, subscribe to our podcast, Refirement Life, using the podcast player of your choice. Always remember, you are never too old to set a new goal or to dream a new dream. Thanks again for joining us on this episode. Until next time.